Welcome to Show Studio. It's our first broadcast of Paris Fashion Week, so a very special broadcast, and it's also a special discussion because we're talking about Dries Van Noten, and obviously it's an incredibly exciting time for him at the moment because he's about to have this incredible exhibition which is opening just in a matter of days at the Musée d'Art Décoratif in Paris, which will be absolutely beautiful, Dries Van Noten inspirations. And I've got a beautiful and amazing set of panellists with me to help unpick all things Dries Van Noten, but I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
I'm Helen Seamons, Menswear fashion editor for The Guardian and The Observer.
Hywel Davies, I'm a fashion writer and also course leader in fashion communication at Central St Martin's.
I'm Hettie Judah, I'm a writer and editor and I specialise in fashion, art and design.
I'm Caroline Burstein and I'm creative director of Browns and brownsfashion.com.
I want to start by picking on you, Hal. I'm sorry to do this, but I know that you know Dries's process really well because you wrote about him in your book, Fashion Designer's Sketchbook. Tell me a bit about how he works, because that's obviously what the exhibition is about. It's about how he sort of gathers his inspirations together.
Okay. Well, I think, a lot about the way of him designing, the way he works is really about the final product. It's really about making clothes that he wants people to see, and I think it's a lot to do with him and his background. His father was a retailer, so he's really aware of the business of fashion and about selling clothes. So, and the way he approaches his work is about really thinking about how he brings together all these different, really eclectic, diverse inspirations. And it is kind of like a collage of ideas, everything that he does and brings together. But I think it becomes, he's really clever at refining ideas. So you might see certain reference points from wherever his inspiration's from, but there's such a process that everything is meticulously gone through. So the finished product it's actually really conceivable and easy to understand for the customer. And he's not so driven by trends. We do see a big shift in what he does from season to season, but things that Dries did 5 years ago seem always kind of relevant now. So it's very much about building a wardrobe. It's not kind of this constant reinvention every season, which a lot of big designers are kind of forced to do, I think.
Completely. And it's interesting because there's so much to talk about with someone like Dries, because he's got such a sort of interesting approach on so many different levels. Like, for one thing, he just does two men's, two women's collections. He's not got involved in that whole sort of pre-collection resort thing that everyone else is having to do. Do you notice that, Caroline, with him, that he seems kind of anti-fashion in some ways?
Yes, I think he's very down to earth, and as you say, I think it is his retail upbringing and that background that he really understands what his customer needs and how the retailers need to actually show his work. He does do actually, but quietly in Milan. It doesn't make a big fuss about it.
Exactly.
But I also think I think it's about 90% of his business is actually clothes. It's not accessories or bags or fragrance.
Just clothes,
So that's really important that is the focus.
Do you think that comes through, Helen? You were kind of nodding when Hal said that. Do you think that really comes through when you see a Dries show that it is about the clothes? It's not kind of this.
Definitely. And they don't really push it from a press office point of view. You can't request accessories separately. They don't send them. It's the look, and quite often you don't get the shoes or anything that comes with it. Even though they have all of that there, it's definitely much more about all the clothes.
And it's interesting what you were saying, Cameron, as well, about the way he shows, because there's such an element. You see like 50, 60, whatever looks on the catwalk, but then there's kind of 500, 600 in the showroom, and I think that's what's so interesting with how he works with the press as opposed to how he works with the buyers. And
yes,
it must be amazing going to that showroom.
It is amazing. It's very challenging, but it's also very exciting. And because he's got probably about 80 stores worldwide, each and every store can actually make their version of Dries and what they choose as their own and quite individual. You don't see that much duplication everywhere you go, and that's very gratifying, I think, for everybody. Also, I mean, I've been fortunate enough probably to have seen his very first shows all those 20 years ago, and I've been a huge fan always, and what's great about him is that he can dress men or women. He sees everyone as an individual, and his clothes are not just for one body shape or one age group. You can actually, there's something very universal and very appealing for there's something for everyone there, without him diluting anything at the same time, which is really, really quite a skill and quite a study. You really feel the work that's gone behind every single collection is really tremendous, and we all benefit from it. So he's a very special designer.
No, he is a very special designer. I find that line he walks really interesting, that we think of him as being incredibly sort of skilled with his, you know, his fabrications and his finishes, and being a very sort of, I guess in some ways, intellectual, cerebral designer, but then on the other hand, the way he operates it is so driven by commerce, and he thinks so, you know, he said fashion, like, my clothes aren't art, it's all about the final point of sale, and I think to walk that divide, it's something that other designers haven't managed to do and stay relevant. You know, you could look at it in the UK at someone like Paul Smith, who has a very similar approach but has kind of moved out of being seen as someone who's a real sort of tour de force creatively, and I'm interested with how he's maintained that balance. Hettie, how do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, you know, I love Dries Van Noten. I think he's incredibly talented up front, but I think there are some problems. I think he doesn't actually, you know, we know him in the fashion world, but he doesn't actually have huge name recognition outside the fashion world. And I actually know this from trying to sell things second-hand, and you cannot sell Dries Van Noten on eBay, for example.
Do you think that's because he doesn't advertise?
Partly because he doesn't advertise, but I mean, you know, he doesn't have that kind of Paul Smith name recognition at all. Although he has a lot of points of sale, I think he's got quite a kind of loyal customer base that, you know, really love the whole Dries Van Noten way of dressing, and this ability to combine things, as we were saying, from multiple seasons, and you building up a kind of large wardrobe from it. And I think it's really significant that he's chosen to do this show in Paris, the exhibition, rather than in his native town of Antwerp, which has an amazing fashion museum.
Completely.
And I think, you know, I think a few years ago, I feel like he had a kind of moment where he suddenly went, actually, I need to start, you know, seeming a bit more relevant, and I need to start plugging into a new audience, and I actually need to kind of slightly put myself out there a bit more. I felt there was a bit of a step change in that menswear collection where he had the artist painting alongside. It was a few years ago. There was suddenly a kind of shift. There was a much fresher feeling on the catwalk since then. I think that he suddenly started to feel, you know, because in fact he's been going like 30 years. It's more than 20.
Yes, but showing it's probably.
But I think that's a lot to do with the appeal that it is. You know, he doesn't advertise, so he's not pulled into all that, you know, that constant changing and reinventing and image making, you know. And I think that, to me, that's what appeals to him as a designer, because he's actually quite serious about being a craftsman, you know, about producing clothes that are quite serious in some ways. And I think the skill he does have, the shows are really amazing. Like when you go to the menswear, womenwear shows, they're really beautifully created. And, you know, it does tell a very clear story about the inspiration. So I think they're actually quite exciting. But, you know, then you do go and see the commercial collection, and there is 600 pieces that you can buy from. So it's actually quite business savvy in some ways. I think that's what's really clever about him.
I don't think it's a bad thing. It's interesting that you can't, you know, you can't sell on eBay, but I
just think it's interesting.
I think it's. I think that's quite refreshing, actually. That he's not sort of so spread that it's not so easily identifiable, and by that very fact, they're actually the pieces that he has or that he sells and that we buy are actually have a much longer life. They're pieces that one can covet, and they're not sort of judged by age. You don't tire of them because they're the fashion of last year and suddenly it's over, which we see so much with the big brands, which they sort of make huge statements, and then within a season they've got to completely reinvent themselves. Whereas Dries has been able, year after year, season after season, just be true to himself. And I, for one, as a woman and as one of his retail buyers, I really appreciate that. You know, it's really lovely. I'm always waiting to see what beautiful piece out of all his collections that, you know, he's going to bring out that you know that you can keep forever. And I think the exhibition in Paris is going to be very exciting. It's going to be full of so many things that we'll all go, oh my God.
There's amazing art in there. There's like
that.
Francis Bacon going to be in there, Damien Hirst, like absolutely incredible. Because you were saying before you were going to go when you're in Paris, aren't you?
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
so
I feel like
jealous.
I need to be in there for a whole day.
Yeah.
It would just be complete visual overload.
He's always been very interested in research and stuff. I mean, I know in Antwerp that we're in the old ethnography collections there, he used to kind of go through them to look for samples of embroidery and that kind of thing. So he's
always
done a lot of research.
All the fabrics are just completely stunning, aren't they? They're like on their own, really, compared to a lot of collections that you see.
And it's what you say, Hal, because some of the pieces are made in India. But they don't have an "I'm made in India" feel about them at all. They really are him and his design and what he's done and brought out that craft, the craftsmanship that still exists wherever he goes for it, and brings it up to, makes it appropriate for today. And that's very
and I think the thing you talk about that he doesn't make a big thing of pre-collections, and the focus is 2 main collections, and because he talks about how he spends all his time investing in the fabrics and the designs, so he does make 2 decent statements a year, which I think is really good.
I think it's enough as well, because they're so good, and like you said, they're so well refined that I would hate it if he suddenly started doing like a fast fashion. It would be really it would just be weird.
Should there be more people that follow the Dries model then, of being, pulling back, being much more sort of comfortable, doing something where, even just the way he's kind of very Antwerp focused. I know this exhibition is in Paris, it feels very much like he's his own master. That's something we don't see very often.
But it is unusual because he owns his own business, which I think being in Antwerp gives him that independence. But it's a scary old route to go. And as I know it sounded like I was being very negative, but you can see that you suddenly hit a wall of not being able to grow anymore as a business, and it's quite, it's really difficult to tread that fine line between continuing to expand and kind of manageability. So I think he's at a kind of teetering point at the moment, it feels like.
Well, it'll be interesting because he has got, is it 500 stockists? It's huge, and several stores. But it'll be interesting when he does get older and how he is going to pass that business on, because he is the brand. He's very much part of it, and he's the designer but also in charge of the business. So it's how do you continue when he's no longer there, because it's such a huge name. You would have to think about longevity of the brand.
I want to pick up on that more because I think it's a really astute point for him, that the fact that he's in charge creatively but also the CEO, because that's not something, you've just had it with Christopher Bailey now at Burberry, but it's not something that you see a lot. And I guess in a way, maybe that's the ultimate thing in being a modern designer, is being able to straddle both. Do you think we're going to start to see more of that, or do you think it is a kind of slightly worrying position to be in if it's your own label? Because, as you say, it's really hard to sort of...
Well, I think it's difficult if you look at all the, specifically British designers coming out. They're trained at, whether it's RCA or St Martin's, and, the training is to be creative. It's not to be a business person. So that's why a lot of the fantastic designers here go and work in fashion houses in Paris or wherever. But because they're employed as creatives, not as people that understand figures and business. So I think, Dries, it's quite a rare thing for someone to be able to do both.
I think the reason he's able to do it is because from the beginning he's built a very solid team, loyal team around him. They are like a family, and they are all very close. And over the years, he's got obviously a very, something very good around him. So he knows his people and knows what he can delegate. And as long as that stays strong, it obviously works for him. Yeah. But it is rare. It's not many people that can cope with both.
I mean, he does also have that family background, as we were saying, in retail as well. I think it's his 3rd generation. And I think his store in Antwerp's actually 1 block down the road from his grandfather's greatest rival as a kind of little menswear store in Antwerp.
That's adorable. Do you think, I'm interested, how do you think we'll start seeing colleges doing courses that are both, like 50% creative, 50% you learn how to open a fashion business?
No.
Please, no.
We just don't have the resources, and we get requests from students, we want to be more business trained, and the emphasis of the education here is creative, and that's what the art schools here have built their reputation on. It's about pushing creativity. But we do try and bring it in about entrepreneurship and understanding business, but it's difficult to teach everything, and they're almost 2 separate sorts of people that appeals to, a business minded person or a creative person. You'd almost be a split personality to want to do both. Or maybe this is where it does need to go, maybe this is where we need to think about. But I think it's tricky because that's what London does really well, and I think if people want to study business, they might do something at MA level later. But the houses in Paris want what they get from London students, which is the innovation, creativity.
So let's take a slightly different tack and talk a little bit about what we expect from Dries aesthetically, because we're about to see the show and we've thrown out a lot of different stuff in it, and I think it suits a word you said right at the start, Hal, which was eclectic, because he is in some ways incredibly eclectic, but there's definitely clear Dries codes. You know, if you see a picture from a Dries collection, I think you can, especially in the last few seasons, you can say it's Dries. What is it that we look for? Helen, what do you expect when you go to like a menswear Dries show?
Colour, print, embroideries, layering of silhouette. I'm kind of expecting there will be some sort of like texture, furry texture, although he doesn't really follow like what trends are. He usually kind of ticks some of them just on the edges, so I would think there would be something like that in there. Yeah.
Do we all love that men's show?
Yeah.
It was incredible, wasn't it? It's my favourite show. So I'm really biased. I'm like, did we love it? Yes, we did. What else do we look to him for? Does everyone agree with Helen's checklist there? Do you think that's quite a
But then, of course, the one thing that was extraordinary about that men's show is he suddenly was doing prints.
Yeah, he dropped the print.
Embellishments, so it was a huge shift for him. And these incredible, really strong 90s references coming in as well. Which is a much stronger kind of fashion reference than I've seen from him for a long time.
Sure.
And I think also, and this is for menswear and womenswear, it's always that sort of play between masculine and feminine.
Yeah.
There's always a bit of both in the menswear and the girls, which I think is always, you know, part of the DNA really.
Definitely. Should we see what he's done this season? Should we just scroll through and have a look? It's interesting, when we had a little glimpse when stuff was coming in before, we talked about the palette that we saw at the men's, because obviously it was kind of colour blocked quite literally, and the models came out in these gangs, and there was a blue section, yellow, the pink and the green, and that's obviously coming through in this already, but in a slightly more sort of mixed up fashion.
In a funny kind of way, I feel these silhouettes are much more reminiscent of Dries than the menswear was of his previous. I mean, you've got that kind of not pyjama jacket, but that kind of dressing gown, tied up,
a bit kimono-y,
slouchy,
But it's interesting, I guess, because with this big exhibition, there's so much press around him at the moment. I don't think he's a designer to kind of bow to pressure, but you'd expect to see something that was very sort of Dries in its DNA. And I know he's made a point that this exhibition isn't a retrospective, but it is really showing off a huge amount of his archive.
I mean, this kind of op embellishment actually is something quite new for him. I've not seen that kind of Bridget Riley style, you know, op art kind of style.
Yeah, because that's quite clean, really, isn't it? For a pattern.
So there's actually less of the ethnographic references, and although that weirdly 14 looks like something he was doing in the 80s, I'd almost say, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
That's going right back to his personal roots, I'd say, that particular silhouette.
Well, I'm sure for him, I think as a designer, creatively, it must be incredibly sort of refreshing going through your own archive and going through your own inspirations. You must rediscover so much stuff, so perhaps that's come from him sort of delving into his own archive boxes.
What's also funny is that these patches are so reminiscent of what's been happening in the menswear collections as well.
Especially like Raf Seamons and
Are you enjoying what you're seeing, Caroline? Is this a buyer's dream, this collection?
He's usually fits the buyer's dream. Yes, there are lots of things that already I can see that.
Is it very different when you go to the showroom? Talk to me about, because I think for a lot of our viewers, they aren't aware of that sort of completely different side, so that they just see this collection. So talk to me about how different it is.
The collections we see are super edited.
Yeah.
And what you see in the showroom are probably maybe 4 or 5 different colour variations and fabric variations, not necessarily style variations, but you've then got a much wider choice of colours and colours, styles and textures, and that gives you a broader. It allows you to mix more as well, and to produce your own rail, if you like.
And are they quite receptive? Because I know they have very long relationships with retailers. Everyone always talks about the Barney's sort of link that they have. But are they very receptive in terms of, if you said, if you're often picking up sort of something in a particular finish, would they start to shape what they were producing around their buy?
No.
Around the buyers?
No. It's very much you're selecting from them.
From them.
They dictate. He dictates, and you you find your way. You find your way in it.
I used to find it quite, from a press point of view, I used to find it quite, not depressing, but disheartening when you go to the showroom, because you'd see the collection before you do the actual show re-see, and you get this vision and you understand the story and you sort of pick out some references. Then you go to the showroom and I find it quite overwhelming.
It's so
these
overwhelming,
racks
isn't
and
it?
racks
Just rails,
but also
racks.
every version of everything, you know, in all the different colours, and you just think, it's just a business.
That's where
it's
that's
very
where I
different.
think you kind of have to champion the stylist that he works with, because that relationship and how we think of Dries is like how this is put together. And if you see the showroom and you see this, it's so far apart.
Worlds apart,
I may be wrong in this, but I remember kind of talking to people about it about 7-8 years ago, and apparently he used to allow the models to put the outfits together for themselves actually before they went on the catwalk.
Oh really?
Which I thought was extraordinary.
I bet it's more contrived.
That was
with
certainly the kind of word that was going around at that time.
It's Nancy Rhodes, isn't
Nancy
it?
Rhodes is the style.
I think she's amazing.
Because that's a very fresh way. I mean, if you even look at how all these are put together, there's a sort of freedom to it. There's a sort of.
But that's a real strength of Nancy Rhodes, isn't it?
Yeah,
That
I mean,
kind of ease
obviously they
of
have that relationship. They've worked together for years, and you know, this is still very Dries. I'm not saying that she's kind of taken over it, but just the difference between when you see the rail and you see the showroom, and then you see how this is put together.
It's hard
it's really
work.
clever.
Believe me, it is hard work. I mean, it's you know, a lot of work, as you say, has been done for us here by the stylist, and everyone takes their leads from that, because you, as the journalist, are going to photograph these looks, and that's what influences. But you'll go back in and you'll see probably a whole collection of knitwear that's not being shown. Just some easy pieces that work with it, that you can pick up on.
But it is true, when you go to different stores, when you go to Browns or Liberty, I'm thinking the menswear now, or if you go to Selfridges, you do get a sense that you're not just seeing copies of each pick, which is really good, you know, from a consumer point of view, that each store's got their own take on the buy.
I mean, he's very much into that kind of total store experience as well, that each of his stores has got a completely individual style to it.
Completely.
And that it's absolutely all thought out.
They shut their stores for a week, don't they, when they're swapping over the collections, which I think there's something really great about that. Yeah, in Antwerp, where they kind of redo it. I just think there's something it's kind of quite quaint and sweet, that it's kind of like out with the old and with the new, and completely redeveloped. It's that immersive idea that you go and it's all changed. What were our thoughts on what we're seeing here? Because it's interesting, that checklist you did, Helen, because you kind of, I would keep going through it in my head and going tick, tick, you got it all right, because we're seeing the kind of the florals that we'd come to expect, you know, the fuzzy fur pieces that came through in the men's, and an amazing colour. That orange is just incredible.
Yeah,
I feel like he's taking a lot of cues from interiors as well. So you've got these flowers cascading over people's shoulders, and then coming up also in the bottom halves as well, that almost are reminiscent of very ornate kind of wood carvings from the ceiling, which are then picked up on maybe in a kind of curtain fabric. I mean, the size of the applique that was kind of coming down the sides of the coat was very much, you know, interior decoration size prints. I often feel like his stuff
feels like that, because there's always that kind of slightly like Ruskinian Morris type thing about it, because it's so beautifully sort of ornate and embroidered, and there's always a real depth to it. I think that always is an element that I feel with his collections, is it looks very rich in that respect.
I think there's a very lovely boldness to this collection as well, and in some of the embroideries it is like making what we've got coming into the shops now, but even bolder and cleaner.
Would you want to wear this, Helen?
Yeah, definitely. More towards the end.
Completely.
And I always think, when I think of Dries Womenswear, I always think it's very elegant.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's always very kind of
men's
sensitive.
as well, isn't
it? Definitely.
And they're timeless.
Yeah.
You can't put them into a time, really. I have pieces that I've had for years, and I will, you know, bring them out, and people always comment on them. They don't know who it's from or where it's from, but it's a stunning garment. It's a stunning piece. And
I mean, this is a more difficult, the silhouette that Hannah Gabbio was wearing kind of back
Can
a
we
couple
just
of
go
ago.
back a little bit, Liam?
You know, that's you're going to notice that. I mean, that's a less easy one to.
But he's
kind of
probably got
recombine.
it without the
That big sleeve.
With the big bold.
Yeah.
Because a bit
piece
later
in the front.
Because a bit later on, I was definitely feeling we were back into a kind of very intuitive Dries palette with the kind of rusts and the foxy colours matched with the teals, and that quite kind of easy to combine palette. And this is definitely more acidic. I mean, I guess it's not exactly the same palette as the menswear, but it definitely chimes with
it's much younger, isn't it?
more acid flavour.
Yeah, I think it is. I thought the men's felt very young, especially
really young
from those kind of really dark florals, where that felt almost quite sort of, that had a fussiness to it, that felt like that interior thing. It felt like it was for slightly older man. The men's felt really young, and this does as well, like really sort of pops and brights.
I'm very intrigued by that number 10 as well, because your eye first picks up on that big op print, but then there's a lot, there are those ruffles from
I'm
the last
intrigued if
season
that's one
sticking
piece,
out
or if that's a top under a dress, or if that's just how the sleeve works. I'm really intrigued by that piece.
Well, that Spanish feel of the last collection, I guess it's kind of slightly still seeping through in that one as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the Antwerp thing, because it's something I think our viewers will find really interesting, and I know we're probably all really tired of talking about the Antwerp Six, but let's talk a little bit about that kind of, about that period. I'm going to go to you, Hettie, because you're like our resident Antwerp expert. But tell me a bit about the city and why it's produced so much creative talent.
I mean, there are a number of things that happened. There was, of course, this very close group of people who, at that point, they were trained by in a really traditional fashion, and it's still actually the Antwerp Academy is really traditional in the way that it teaches. You have to be able to sketch, you have to be able to pattern cut, you've got to have all of these very old style skills. And then there's also this thing about using your imagination. And at the time when these guys were coming through, they were starting to suddenly see that real revolution happening in Paris at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And we're really wanting to change the way they were presenting things, to change, basically to kind of embrace this new, exciting world that was fashion. But what's interesting is they really do combine these traditional skills with that desire to kind of really put themselves out there. And a lot of them, I don't think Dries did, but a lot of them actually worked after graduating for a company called Bartsons that was a really traditional rainwear manufacturer. So that's why you see people like Margiela having this obsession with trench coats and these really, deconstructing these really quite traditional garments. And I think they felt that, when they kind of graduated and they were kind of starting to do their own collections, there was also quite an important injection of funding and publicity from the Flemish government as well, called the Golden Spindle Awards, which I think Dries won the first year, and I mean progressively different major talents from Antwerp won in kind of 4 years running. And it just gave them a bit of a financial push, it gave them support from local manufacturers, and it gave them the impetus really to put themselves out there. But I think they realised that nobody was really going to pay much attention to them because they didn't come from a traditional fashion city. And so they'd always been really good at, and this is still the case today I think with Antwerp students, they always produce fantastic photographs. They're really good at presenting themselves, presenting their stories clearly, communicating very well. And when they go through the whole graduation process, they have to present literally in front of a table of 20 people halfway through the year. They do this thing called the pass, and they bring out a couple of silhouettes, and they get really attacked. I mean, it's vicious. And particularly in the fourth year, I've been allowed to watch it, and you literally see these kids in tears. It's really harsh. And they'll start in first year with 20 students. You end up with 5 graduating at the end. So it's tough. But they come out of it with, they know how to create, a lookbook that completely communicates to buyers. They know how to put things together. They've got all of these good skills, which I think really were founded in this generation.
Do you remember kind of that arrival and that explosion when they kind of emerged on the scene, and how did was it a really exciting time? How did it make you feel?
I think probably I'm the only one here.
I was trying to get really
was
diplomatic.
a very, very exciting time. It was a lovely Italian guy, I think Eo Bocci, who brought them, introduced them to Paris as a group, and Well, I've always been on this. At that time, I had my molten brown hat on, so I wasn't in fashion except for going to the sort of shows, and it wasn't my day-to-day, but I have a very strong memory of going and seeing Dries and Margiela, and I'm terrible at remembering the names, and Anne de Meulemeister, those. And it was the early days of Comme des Garçons as well, who brought her that Japanese. But there was always either French fashion, or if it was anyone else, it was high street and rubbishy and badly made. And here you were getting something very new and deconstructed, and beautifully, beautifully finished and beautifully made with very good fabrics. And it was that attention to detail in a very simple, stripped down way that really, hit the fashion world and, by storm, really. And you still see, a certain generation, and even all generations are influenced by that severity, simplicity, attention to detail, from the cloth to the structure and what to do with it. So it was very nice. It was very refreshing to have this sort of newness coming in, and a whole group coming in from the outside of what was a very French-dominated industry. And today, those of us that go to Paris, we can see it's totally international.
Completely, yeah.
And it's tougher than it's ever been. There's no question. There's nothing easy about it for anybody entering this in this industry. At the same time, I think when from these days, from the Antwerp Six onwards, one could be more open to allowing to let in or to show talent when it was there.
Do you agree with that? Do you think that their arrival has made fashion more
I think so. And I think that you mentioned Comme des Garçons and that sort of period when all the Japanese came over. I wasn't about then, but when I look about it and I see the changes that happened, and you do see that massive influence. And I do see Dries' work similar to Comme des Garçons. I think it's it's softer and it's calmer, but there is that kind of eclectic, visionary sort of playing and experimental brought together. It's just a lot more refined with Dries, I think. But and I think also if you think about the time or what was going on, when Dries was at college and the influence of punk and all that sort of attitude, I think it's really important for still how he works now, because it is quite, for a mainstream brand, which is what he is, he still does challenge things, I think, and he still is pushing things forward. It's just done in a very sensitive way, which there's no shock, which you might get with big brands, and it isn't so driven by image as in the fashion image, like photography and advertising. So I think when you take that away, it is really just dependent on the clothes. And
all gimmicks and tricks are removed.
Which is quite a powerful tool. We're so used to being seduced by the latest Celine ad or whatever. But here we just have to talk about the product, which is brilliant.
So I was going to say, do you find that quite refreshing? I guess as working when you're styling, there must be something really refreshing when the only baggage that comes with a label is just the clothes themselves. There's none of that kind of...
There's nothing that you're thinking, oh, should I be doing it like that, or should I not be doing it like that? You just have this as kind of your point of reference, and really, really beautiful clothes to work with.
Do you find it easy to start with juicy stuff?
Yeah. Because there's so much there that you can take from it and put it into whatever shoot or story you're doing. I mean, you can just see there going by then, like the floral, like the kind of more masculine tailoring. There's so many kind of avenues you can take it down. It's a really inspiring collection to work with, and always.
I guess it's similar to what you were saying with the buy. You can put your own story on it, even though there's such a clear story there already, which I guess is it's another strength of his. I think that when you have such confidence in yourself to be able to not advertise, but also kind of it never shouts the collections, I don't think, but they're always incredibly visually strong. I think that's a really interesting line to walk. Everyone's silent now. What were you going to say when I interrupted you?
What I was going to say is I think it was Helen that was talking about how good the styling was for the collections, and I think although they don't advertise, what he does do is put his money into creating amazing shows. And he was a real pioneer of very, very photogenic shows. So whether it's, you know, golden catwalks, or do you remember the one where they were walking on the top of the table, the banqueting table, or, you know, huge walls of fresh flowers or whatever. And he's worked with, you know, really brilliant kind of fashion stylists. I mean, do you remember the last one where they had the gold pearls in there? I mean, so although he doesn't pay for advertising, one way that he really kind of ensures that he gets images out there is to have these shows that are just so
he uses the show as his
gorgeous
advertising
looking
campaign.
that you're going to want to have those in your publication.
But it's interesting because that goes back to this idea that we talked about right at the start, which is kind of him. It's kind of it's not complete credit, but him only showing two Womenswear, two Menswear, because it feels like he uses the fashion show, as his advertising campaign, and it's much more to him than I think it is to other designers. It never feels rushed, and during Fashion Week, even though your schedule as a fashion editor or a stylist or, you know, a journalist is incredibly rushed, there's a slowness to the Dries collection. It feels really considered, and I guess that idea of using the show as an ad campaign, we've lost that a little bit. You know, shows are quite clinical now.
Well, shows are just used as advertisements, you know, to be streamed online so they can be seen globally. You know, I still think Dries comes across as quite serious as a designer. You know, his show is for the industry, it's for press and it's for buyers, really. Yeah, he doesn't streamline, but he doesn't show much on his website.
And also quite a lot of the amazingness of the experience of the show, you don't see, you miss. Like, we're missing from these pictures. You can't see that in Hotel de Ville. You can't see those amazing chandeliers and the ceiling. You get that experience when you're there, so then you remember it a different way, and obviously you want to talk about it and share that with your readers or whoever your kind of respective audience is. And a lot of, I find, that detail is missing in those images, yet he still wants to do that, to create that experience, to sell it to the people in the room. You get a lot when you're there.
That's interesting, the difference between selling the idea and the concept to the people in the room as opposed to a broader audience. And he plays with that, doesn't he? You're right. It's not, even just by him having a live musician there, that's something, and then not streaming, it's something that's just for the people in the room.
Yeah, and I think that's about him wanting to, you know, be taken seriously as a designer. You know, he really wants people to think about what he's doing, which I think is good.
He doesn't want to be a personality.
No, not at all. And you don't really see or hear much about his clothes on celebrities, or you don't see that sort of push.
I was going to say, it's not about who's sitting on his front row.
No, definitely it's not about red carpet or anything like that.
But I think that's what makes this exhibition even more exciting, because it feels like, even though he's incredibly, this is what I mean with that, such an interesting line talk, because even though he's an incredibly commercial designer, he feels like this kind of free creative spirit that no one quite knows that much about. So even though it's kind of incredibly accessible on the one hand because it's designed to be worn, there's a loftiness to it, and I mean that in a really great way, that you want to sort of peek into his world. It's really exciting. I want to know about what influence this has on young people, because we have you here, Helen. Obviously you work with so many young St Martin students, and I'm intrigued who are the designers that they're really excited about. Do they talk about Dries? Do they find it exciting?
Yeah, they do actually. The people that are really serious about clothes, as in really like dressing, you know, and like beautiful clothes, you do hear them reference Dries a lot. You know, they do, and they'll go to second-hand shops, and when they go to Paris, they'll go to the markets, and if they find Dries, they get very excited. You know, but that's the serious.
They're not looking hard enough on eBay though.
Yeah,
Buy my shoes.
Yeah. But yeah, I think they do get it. Yeah, they do. You know, and they see it as different. They see that it's not about the latest campaign or the latest bag, or you know, or the hype that's driven by so many designers now. They see it as quite serious fashion, which is good. You know, it's not for everybody.
It's
but
good that you can still just be a serious designer and be successful without all that other stuff.
I would imagine for the students as well, finding a piece of vintage or that he will spin a whole lot of ideas for them.
Yeah,
and they be a reference point.
Yeah, and they appreciate. They can see the research. You know, St Martin's is so much about research and ideas and originality, and you know, I think they can see that that's the process Dries goes through. You know, that they aspire to do. You know, that real rich, independent research.
And I guess it's that lovely thing, which is, it goes back to what you were saying. The London colleges are so about, it's about the clothes with Dries, as Helen just said. You know, it's never about the latest bag or kind of the latest gimmick. It's about having amazing references and doing amazing clothes. As you said, 90% of his business is clothes, and I guess as a student, kind of what's more inspiring than that, really.
And respectful as well. You know, definitely.
I think that's a lovely note to end on, just how brilliant Dries is and how great all the clothes are. And I'm going to go and try and start saving up for all of it, because it's absolutely beautiful. I can't wait to see it in brown. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.